Thank you, Sid, for such an insightful opening session. Please welcome the moderator of our next session, Corporate Directors Summit, a look into the boardroom, technology reporter at the Wall Street Journal, Pritika Rana.
Good morning, everyone. You know, just before we get started, I want to say, when I was asked to do this panel, I wondered, am I the right person to do it? I'm clearly not Hispanic. What value can I add here? But then I thought about all the times that I have been the only brown woman in the room, and I thought about all the times that I've been the only non-American, on the table. And I thought about how lucky I've been to be at a company that elevated my voice and my career. And I'm hoping that this discussion will help each of you along that path. So, I want to welcome Darren and Guillermo. Welcome.
Hello.
And let's set the stage for our audience before we get right into it. Darren, why don't you kick us off by just telling us how often your board meets, where, and what issues typically dominate the agenda?
Sure. Our board of directors, as a public board, we meet 4 to 5 times a year, depending on the topics. And typically, it's in San Diego. We'll occasionally travel, but
tough place, right?
Yeah, tough place to be is in San Diego. So they enjoy coming out, and but 4 to 5 times a year. And typically, the topics are obviously, they're the governance of the organization. They have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders, so we talk about the financial capabilities of the company. But it's really, at the end of the day, strategy and people always are the key components of a board meeting. It's how are we going to access the right people to execute against our strategy so that we can deliver on our duties to shareholders.
Yeah, and boards have a ton to discuss, especially in an uncertain environment like ours right now. Where does diversity and inclusion fit into that discussion?
Yeah, diversity and inclusion is obviously a key topic for our organization. And just to give you perspective, if and even how we were able to access Guillermo, 80% of our restaurant employee base is Hispanic or Latino. And so it's a substantial component of our core business on what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then across the organization, about 20% of our employees, 18 to 20% of our employees above the restaurant level are Hispanic and Latino. And so as we think about being competitive in the marketplace, this is an area that is incredibly important to our strategy, is how do we develop our people, how do we grow them, how do we help them achieve more? And then our consumer base is even more shocking. It's over a third of our customer base is also Hispanic and Latino. So this is critical to us to understand as an organization, not only for growing our people, but also accessing our customers and reaching them in more meaningful ways. And so it's critical. So as we formed our board and we were looking for a new board member, Guillermo was a perfect fit because we were looking to bring a Hispanic lens to the board to enable us to say, how do we reach our people differently and improve our culture towards this consumer base?
Yeah, and
I want to add a little bit of hot sauce there because it was interesting because when Darren and I were talking about, I was in his office and I'm like, why would I come on the board of Jack in the Box? And he says, well, first of all, and at that time, I don't think we've used the Del Taco numbers as well.
That's right.
So it was like 78% of the employees in our network are Latino. And we're building a digital strategy, so he had me at La, right? It was like, and then the consumer base, if we look at high, medium, and low, is the high and the medium users or consumers are over-indexed Latino. So those two numbers in the high and medium category was like, okay, if consumers are there or employees are there, and our strategy is digital, that's a trifecta for me, right?
Yeah, I mean, you answered the next question that I was going to ask you, which is, you obviously have a ton of experience with technology companies. What wisdom do you think you brought to the board discussions? And you've kind of answered that question already.
Yeah, well, I spent my career in tech, and I grew up here in Silicon Valley in my career, mostly at Cisco Systems, where I was the CIO. So I saw, growing and scaling companies, but using technology as the accelerator. And again, when Darren and I were talking, and he's like, hey, our strategy is digital, but I also thought about how we look at the employees and the employees' future. If our strategy is digital, where I bring that digital transformation, how do we create pathways for those employees so that they don't get displaced, so that they learn how to program the robot versus being displaced by a robot? And that was a real key factor for me, right?
He's not giving himself credit. He continues to remind me, since he's joined the board, the stock is up over 40%, and he says it's the G effect. So in a very short period of time, he's had an impact.
In fact, we have a board member who's the CEO of Build-A-Bear, and she says, oh, gee, I want you on my board. I want the 40% up there.
Yeah, and how do you think being, Latino has helped, in terms of your perspective, how has that helped Jack in the Box, given just the customer base and even the employee base?
Well, I think just being able to connect with the employees. When we did we have a really good onboarding program, and it's getting better. But one of the onboarding tours of duty is you have to go to the different stores, both the Jack in the Box and Del Taco stores, and they feed you, okay? And when I walked into there with a few of our leadership, and they knew I was coming, it was humbling for me walking into those stores, and those people, they were just like, somebody looks like me. They talk like me. I was they were, come back. We want to show you what we're doing. Look at this. We have the robotic fryer and this and that. And it's like, holy smokes. I mean, I walked out of there with choked up because I felt like I also, and a message for the board is find a board that you really love and that you connect with, and that's what Jack in the Box. I was like, why Jack in the Box? Look at me. I don't know. Yeah. And it's like, but that was a really deep moment for me. Right?
That's great.
Yeah. I have some statistics here from the Alliance for Board Diversity, which is a coalition on board diversity that HACR currently chairs. Those figures show that Hispanics, on average, hold just 1% of board seats on Fortune 500 companies. I mean, what do you think is the barrier for, or I guess the biggest challenge to Hispanic advancement in corporate America? I'll start with you and then we'll go to Darren.
Well, I think there's probably two things. I think one is that, if you look at the corporations, the pipeline is less than 5%, right? So if the pipeline is less than 5%, then how are you going to actually increase that number? But if you look at way down here in the pipeline, like even where Jack in the Box employees play, is that the number, like let's just take California. California is interesting because the majority of California are Latinos, right? 41% of California are Latinos, yet less than 2% of board seats in California are made up by Latinos. So the pipeline starts here. So I would say is let's start with our school children, get them involved in understanding their future, and the future to me is digital. So every job will have a digital component, even those that are in Jack in the Box, but it starts here. And we have to really build that pipeline. Because otherwise, we'll be here a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, still talking about the same thing. And the boardroom looks like this. That's what the boardroom looks like this right here. It should look like that, right?
And one quick follow-up before I go to Darren. So then does that responsibility, is that on our schools? Is that with the government? Does that responsibility lie with companies that pick up young talent?
I think it's this intersection of corporate and education. And I think they're still too far apart. And I think the businesses and the corporations need to come much more closely to the education system. And right now, it's just two different worlds. And that's actually what I'm working on in my day job. So we're trying to bring those two worlds together.
Wow, interesting. Darren, what's your take on that?
On the component about who's responsible and the pipeline. You know, I'll relate it to Jack in the Box. And I would say that as we started to look at our demographic within our organization, and you know, historically, Jack in the Box has been around 70 years, but I joined 3 years ago. We didn't have a purpose statement. We didn't have mission and vision and values. And we rolled that out, and as we started talking to our employees, we started talking to, and this is restaurant level all the way up to senior management, start to our franchisees. 75% of our franchisees are minority of some descent. And they talked about story upon story about how I started as a cook in the restaurant and now I own 200 restaurants, to I own 30 restaurants. And these stories kept coming up about, I never thought I would have the opportunity to do what I'm doing today. So we started to really hear this over and over, even when we interviewed our Hispanic employees, and we're like, we have an opportunity to help people break out of the box and experience something they never thought was possible. And so that's become our purpose of our organization. And so if you think about that, where are we investing our time to where Guillermo said? We're going right to the restaurant level saying, we have amazing people who are heavily Hispanic. How do we now help them get additional skills, whether it's English as a second language to you name it, to enable them to take the next step in their career progression? And so that's where we see our opportunity is, let's help our employees grow into what they're capable of or what they want to accomplish, to get outside of their own box. And so that's our focus. And so I think it's and the last is whose responsibility? I think it's all of our responsibility. It's the employee as much as the corporation, it's the education system, it's all of the above. So we know we can't do all things, but we can focus on a few areas that we can make a difference. And so that's what we've said is we're going to pour our energy into the restaurant level that we can help them gain, you know, skill sets that would enable them to do many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a little story on when I was visiting, doing my onboarding, there's one of the stores is an innovation store, and we have a robotics sort of a arm that does all the frying and so forth. And there was a young man there, Latino young man, and he was telling me about the whole thing, and I was just like so amazed as to, you know, he's running the whole program. And I said, so tell me about your background. And he says, well, I just finished San Diego State. And I said, so how long have you been working for Jack? And I thought it was like he was going to say, I just started, because I'm running the robotics thing. He says, I started when I was 16. I was a cashier in this same exact store. And I was just like, oh my God, are you killing me right now? And he was just showing, and he wanted to bring up all the other ones in the store. And it was just, and that's what I'm talking about. How do you build that pipeline all the way down from the cashier to corporate?
So he has the opportunity to lead this program across the organization, and our objective is to expand this across the entire organization. So that, you know, this gentleman has that responsibility now that he can bring people along in.
Yeah, and that brings me to a follow-up question. How do you make sure that you're promoting and training talent so that they then can become managers? Do you have practices in place at Jack in the Box that help people, who maybe started out as cashiers become managers eventually?
Yeah, we have different programs at different levels within the organization. From the unit restaurant level has a substantial component of training to, we just launched what we call a district manager training program, and that's really for to teach people leadership skills beyond just how do I run a restaurant, how do I run multiple restaurants, and we teach them financial skills, leadership skills, and we also teach them what I would call how to help them create opportunities for themselves, and we use an acronym called PIE. PIE stands for Performance, Influence, and Exposure. So they have to perform to get access to opportunities, but then how do we help them get exposure throughout the organization to grow their career, or even get exposed to what opportunities exist for me? And also how to use influence, how to serve others to gain influence. And so that's part of the whole training program in our leadership development program. And that leadership development program then goes throughout the rest of the organization. So it starts at the DM level and then grows through the rest of the level.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier that Latinos make about 18% of managers
Correct.
at the company.
Above the restaurant level, yes.
Above the restaurant level. I'm guessing, are there any goals that the board has set out or your leadership team has set out to bump that percentage? That could be at the company level, employee level, restaurant level. What are they?
Yeah. In the last 12 months, we've initiated a strategy around DEI. Our intent is to publish a public report this year. And so we haven't set the goals. Our objective at this point is understand what we have. We'll understand the landscape that we have as an organization so that we can then start to establish the benchmarks. But as you can tell, bring on Guillermo, what we've done with really understanding where the opportunity is within the organization is we've set in place a roadmap that we can now start to benchmark and say, how do we continue to improve?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what Darren has done is he sanctioned this whole program, and he's even brought in some outside eyes to go, hey, tell us what we really need to do, and they're doing both the whole data analytics around qualitative, but also quantitative and qualitative, and really doing listening tours with the employees and with the managers too. 3 is then a roadmap from that, but 4, I think what you're doing is from that will become accountability sort of plans for the leaders, and both in corporate and in the restaurants, having those accountability plans and tying it back to those metrics. Are we meeting the objectives? And then getting that visibility at the board, right?
And I think absolutely. And the bigger metrics are then, we believe, and I think the data would prove it across industries, is that having a diverse workforce, having ESG goals is good for business. And so that's the bigger picture beyond just the metrics of who are we attracting to the organization, how do we help them grow. We know it's good for business at the end of the day, so we need to combine both of those things. How can we tie a metric of this Latino base of employees and show the results? You tie those two things together, that's powerful, and that's what we're trying to get to.
Right. So how many times has diversity and inclusion come up in, say, your board meetings over the last year? So
being at the executive level for many years now, I can tell you the last 3 to 5 years, it's a topic at every board meeting. I would say prior to that, not so much.
Well, I bring it up at every board meeting.
So, but it's also a topic of our leadership team, right? It's a core. People are at the core of what we do, so we have to talk about this on a regular basis.
And like you said, over a third of your customers are, Latinos, so it makes sense to also incorporate that into your own business strategy.
Absolutely.
And marketing and your own products. Guillermo, I want to turn to you. Have you faced barriers in terms of your career because you were a certain ethnicity? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's in this room has probably faced that, I mean, I was in the board rooms at Cisco Systems, I was in the boardrooms, both from being a presenter, but also being asked to to play a part in the board. And trust me, I was the only one, right? But one of the things that that I always said is, people ask me, is like, hey, well, what's the barrier? And I said, well, the barrier is me. The barrier is you. And if I think about that I'm Latino in Cisco and I happen to, want to aspire to be some leader, then I'm probably thinking about it backwards. Mm-hmm. I am a leader, I deserve to be in the room, and I happen to be Latino. And that Latino is my superpower. But my first and foremost, I had to show up as a leader, and that I deserve to be in that room because I've worked hard to be there. And that's, I think, a mindset, and that's what I tell folks. I also led the organization at Cisco called Conexión, which is the ERG, the Employee Resource Group there. And when we started off, we said that our mission was to connect Latinos in Cisco. And then I thought about that, and I said, actually, we're leaders in this company. Our mission is to connect people. And being Latino is a superpower, and we're able to connect more people. And when customers would come in from Latin America, and we put these people in front of them, POs started getting written, right? Because these were Telmexes of the world and big companies that use our products. And so that's what Darren was saying earlier, is that if you understand your consumer, your employee, and your company strategy, and you align those things, it is a challenge, but you also have to think, if someone is going to do that job, why not me? Mm-hmm. And somebody's going to do that role, why not me?
Yeah, that's honestly a fantastic way to put it. I mean, be a leader first, know that you deserve to be in the room, and lead for your, purpose and mission in your company, and in turn lead for your community as well. And kind of how I've approached it as well,
Right.
Like I said, I was often have been, the only minority in the room, and knowing that that's your superpower and not a limiting factor, can just that thought alone can go a big way.
Well, I think I would just want to add one more piece, and I give a lot of credit to Darren when we were having the initial conversations. He's like, gee, I got to be honest with you. Our consumers and our employees, especially employees, look like you, but there's nobody in our boardroom that does. So we need to fix that. And that's a real, and the board understands that. Mm-hmm. So that's a real, kind of kudos to Darren and the board for really thinking that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Darren, I want to ask you, what can companies be doing better to help employees get rid of these limiting beliefs that they have?
Our focus has been on education, and what I mean by that is every week or every month we have plenty of different sessions to bring our employees into, where we try to educate them on a different perspective. So whether it's this month, it's Pride Month, we're educating on what's the background there. Why is this meaningful to businesses? Why is it important to people in the room that are different than myself? And so whether it's Hispanic or different days throughout the year, we try to do that on a regular basis. And the importance is seeing a different perspective, having a different lens, education, and that way we can understand each other. And so that's the focus of our organization. How do we make a difference through just learning and growth?
Mm-hmm. Are there any best case practices you can share in that regard? Doesn't have to be specific to the Latino community. It could be just broadly, it could just be broad, diversity initiatives that help minority groups.
Well, I don't know that I have any best practices. What we've tried to do is make it a key component of our everyday, and then hold events on top of that. So we have a committee that meets on a regular basis of how do we engage the culture about all these different topics of the day. And then they try to make it a part of weekly, daily activities within the organization. So you may find it come up in, we hosted an event with Guillermo. You can talk about that event. We have an Asian American on our board as well. She hosted an event where we invited any employee in the company to attend and just learn and grow. And then it translates into trying to go across the organization and then take somebody else's superpower and say, we have this thing called a swap meet once a quarter. A swap meet is taking somebody in the organization that has some kind of knowledge. It could be crocheting, it could be learning how to be a pilot, and they get a chance to share that with others in the organization, and people show up. And you would be shocked at the number of topics that people end up attending to listen. Diversity is always a topic from somebody's own personal preference, whatever they care about. It shows up in those meetings. And so we get a great chance to learn from each other, and just examples like the swap meets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know we need to go to questions, but I want to say one more thing, is that the person that Darren has and the team has driving this force is Ana Alvarez. And Ana Alvarez is the head of diversity and inclusion. And trust me, she is a force of nature. And so we're really proud to have Latina leading that effort.
We promoted Ana into a director this year. And we looked at going outside, and we interviewed a lot of high executive level diversity candidates to come in. And the passion, the commitment, the desire for her to make a difference in the organization, she had the board in tears telling her story of coming to America as a student in elementary school from a family that didn't speak English, and how she learned English as a second language and then built her career to where she is today. Yeah, I would bet on that passion 9 times out of 10 compared to the experience, just because of how much she cares about making this an impact for Jack in the Box and her own story. So we're excited to have Ana as part of our leadership for this DEI initiative.
Great. And just before we turn to questions, there are many audience members who might aspire to be CEO one day, or might even want to be on the board of several companies one day. What is your advice to them before we open it up to questions? I'll come to each of you. Guillermo?
Well, people always ask me, gee, how did you break through to the C-level at the Fortune 50 company, and how did you become on the board? And it's like, I asked. It's like, they asked me, what do you want? What do you want to be one day? I said, I want to be you. And they're like, not literally you, but I want to be in that chair. So part of it, going back to some of the challenge, is get out of this sort of like, a lot of times in the Latino culture, we kind of stay in our lane. Mijo, stay in your lane. Don't go out of your lane. It's like, no, get out of the damn lane. It's like, you have the superpower. You wouldn't be in this room if you weren't worthy of being a CEO or being on a board. Start with, if you're not on a board, start with a nonprofit. I started, 20 years ago with a nonprofit. I didn't know, right? And now I'm on, Jack and Blue Shield of California, which is a $25 billion business. It's like, don't limit yourself. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
Darren?
Sure, I'll just quickly add 2 things, in my opinion, is first and foremost, serve others. Find a way to make a difference in those around you, and just give of yourself and the knowledge that you have, because all of us in this room have knowledge. And second, I would say, have a growth mindset with just incredible curiosity. So I know for me, those are the 2 difference makers. It's just give without expecting anything in return, and then just continue to want to learn and absorb from those around me. And that's beyond, I think, what Guillermo's advice was, is ask. Ask for opportunities. Ask for ways that you can contribute.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Darren and Guillermo. We have time for some questions. Yes, let's open it up. The woman in the green jacket.
Good morning, my name is Stephanie. I have a question for you. What was your recruitment strategy when there was a corporate board position open?
So, first we wanted to identify every year on our board, we do a skills matrix. We look at, also the makeup of our board and say, do we have long tenure? Do we have diversity needs? Do we have skill set needs? And two critical components came up as we were going to invest heavily in digital and technology. And we also are missing what Guillermo mentioned in the room, Hispanic Latino, which is a big component of our customer base. So then we went out and said, well, who's the right firm to help us go attract that? And so we went and interviewed a substantial number of search firms, and we found a Hispanic search firm who had a very long list of candidates, and that's where we ended up finding Guillermo. But we did an extensive search trying to find the right fit for who could go access maybe a Latino population that had both technology. I mean, we didn't know if we'd find it, and we were fortunate to find both skill sets in that search.
And they wanted their stock to go up 40%.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Siobhan Scare, here representing Google. Can you repeat the PI acronym, please?
Sure. Performance, influence, and exposure.
And there's one over here, a question in front here.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to come here to talk to us. My name is Chris. One thing that you mentioned in the beginning of the session was that we have about 80% of Latino representation in the stores and about 20% in headquarters. Is there anything that is being done to elevate the roles for the Latinos more in headquarters in the leadership positions for Jack?
Absolutely. It's part of our recruiting strategy. I talked about the development pipeline. Guillermo mentioned it. Is how do we take the restaurant level employees and continue to give them skill sets and train them so they can take on corporate jobs? And then how do we take the members of our corporate team and grow them? And then lastly, when we recruit, it's a key component of our recruiting strategy to our corporate jobs as well, as looking for different diverse skill sets and diversity from a standpoint of gender and equity and inclusion and race. So it's part of our overall strategy.
I think I have it. Juan David Munoz, Chevron Corporation. Thank you for the great panel and great discussion. So just a couple of things. I guess the most important part of the discussion was how we bring inclusivity and D&I to the board, right? When you actually joined the company 3 years ago, did you have any challenges to kind of address this? I mean, because obviously it has been run a certain way and so on, and how would you actually change to a growth mindset, both of you, I guess? Because it's not a simple thing to do, right? I mean, we have many things that have worked in the past, and we are trying to change that mindset, okay? So we need diversity and inclusion, we need people to see different things. It was very natural for you guys to make that change, or it was pretty much of you need to actually convince some people, and how did you do that?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate a little bit because we were at a point in time when I joined that change was needed. We have a very long tenured board. So there was a lot of things happening at once. COVID had started, the world has changed, there's more attention from investors around ESG. And then we have a long tenured board that, I'm coming in as a new leader saying, look, we've done things the same way for a very long time, we need to change. And so change includes everything from the makeup of this board, the experience of this board, but it also is going to require that we invest to grow. Historically, the brand had been more focused on a strategy of share repurchases and delivering value from earnings per share growth from that standpoint. I came in saying we have to invest to grow, to create long-term value, and that means invest in our people and invest in some kind of strategy that's going to enable us to grow. I can tell you not the whole board came from that background, so that meant we had to start to look at board members saying, do we have the right set of board members? An example is we're going to have to invest in technology, and that's our future. If we don't have the right board members that understand that can support us, we have to invest in our people, as I mentioned, from the Hispanic base, because they're our customer as well. how are we going to think about that, and who can provide us that skill set? And so it forced us to have discussions around our strategy to say, do we have the right people in the room to help us? And if not, let's go get that.
Yeah, and I think what was really cool from my perspective is that, you know, I kind of use this concept of C's, right? So I have this, I'm bringing this competence, which happens to be technology, and I'm looking for a fit and the culture of where I'm going, and bringing my culture with that, and then being able to impact the community. So competence, you know, think about what your competence is, how you bring your culture, and do you fit with the culture of where you're going, and can that be a broader impact on the community? And those things really aligned for me when I did the discussions with the board. And they're, like, to Darren's point, is they all know kind of, hey, where we're going happens to be digital, and we need a pathway for our employees and our consumers to get there. And that was, and the board really kind of is really pushing that agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Damon Echeverria. I'm the General Manager in Supply and Trading for Chevron Corporation. Sid had a kind of great opening remarks this morning talking about board membership and serving on nonprofits, et cetera. And when he kind of posed the question to the room, very few people have actually sat on boards or on boards. And kind of the topic of this discussion is in the boardroom. So, you know, you obviously have a leadership team that runs the business. I'm wondering if you could maybe share your perspective of what's the difference, because it's kind of maybe somewhat of a black box mystery. What does a board of directors do? Kind of share the difference between what does a board of directors do versus your leadership team in running the business. What are the differences there?
Yeah, great question. So in a public board, you know, I serve on both public and private. On a public board, you get a lot more of governance as a responsibility, and making sure that we have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders on, do we have the right compensation strategies in place for our organization? Do we have the right, you know, processes in place to make sure our financials are, you know, with integrity and clear, and are we treating all stakeholders appropriately? And then also, is management being held accountable to the strategies that we put in place? And so that's a key component of it. So, you know, their job is to come in and say, you know, challenge us from a thought process on how are we spending our capital, how are we going to invest in our people, how are we going to invest for growth, are we asking the right questions about the business, or are they using their experience to give us thought processes that would force us to think about things maybe we didn't think about. So that's a lot of the time spent. We try to share our strategy on a regular basis at every meeting. We try to focus on 2 to 3 big topics that we may need the input of the board and their experience, and less time on just a strategic update. We want to spend time, you know, and we have different meetings. We have meetings where it's very dedicated to just a pure update and trying to inform the board, and then other meetings where, like I said, there's 2 to 3 big rocks that we have to talk about and have to spend a lot of time dedicated to. If we do X or Y, how does that impact the business long term? And so that's a lot of the topic is the balance between governance, the balance between strategy.
Yeah, and I would just add, because if I think about my journey, my career, I've been an operator my whole life. I've been, you know, running, you know, at Cisco, a $50 billion operation. So, you know, coming in, I have to be thinking about, now I'm on the other side of the table. I'm now part of governance and part of, you know, helping Darren and the team add value to the company. So those are the 2 key drivers, because, you know, I could easily, as you know, Darren, I could easily go, well, what the heck's up with the digital strategy, and how are you know, get into the weeds of the, you know, the transformation, the Oracle upgrades, and blah blah blah, right? Yeah. And it's like, I gotta learn my just step back, because you know, now my role is a bit different. It's on the other side of the table.
It forces us to step up a bit, and because, as you know, in your roles, whatever role you play, there's always more work than you possibly can do. There's always more priorities than we can possibly manage. So I really rely on a board to say, to force me to think differently about maybe how we're thinking about the business, to ask questions that maybe my team is not asking, or to just force us to focus. You know, we think we're focusing all the time. And maybe a board comes in and says, you know, you're trying to do too many things, keep narrowing it. And I think that's important that they hold us to that. Or I think in our daily lives, you think about, I remember a light switch I had at home years ago. And for 2 years, I walked by that light switch on the wall and I knew it was cracked. I just kept walking by that light switch, flipping it on every day. And I'm like, wait a second, you know, why don't it'd take me 30 seconds to go fix this. Why am I not dealing with this? And I use a board for the same reason. We get stuck in our patterns as a leadership team, no matter how many times we think we don't, to where the board comes in and says, wait, I may see it a little bit differently. Have you thought about X and Y? And I may say, I have, but I don't want to do that now. Or I'm like, that's a good point. How do I go back and think about that and bring it back to the board and say, I want to explore that. And that's really the use of a board. They challenge us in ways that, you know, with experience and or knowledge that maybe we're not thinking about.
I'm still trying to get the marketing team to do Bad Bunny or Peso Pluma.
We are out of time, but yes, maybe one quick last question. All right.
More than anything else, congratulations on having such a wonderful Latino in the board.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the rise of the stock. Okay, Salvador Enriquez, Wells Fargo, and I'm congratulating them on the rise of the stock and congratulating Guillermo for being part of the board. You want to see another increase in the stock price? Consider a Latina next time that you're looking for a new board member.
or Wells Fargo could be a huge investor.
Yeah. I have some franchises you could invest in.
Fantastic. On that note, I mean, quick 30 seconds. How do you think boardrooms of the future are going to be different from the boardrooms of today, and why? Quick 30 seconds each.
Yeah, I think this will be as much of a fiduciary conversation, DEI and ESG, as it will be about just one topic on the meeting. I think it's as much about the whole governance process of an organization going forward, because the data shows it delivers results. And so I think it's going to be just as important of a discussion for boards around the country as the financials of the organization.
So I know it says must end now, but I will not tell you. I'll show you. That's what the boardroom of the future looks like.
Ooh, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much. You guys have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for having us. And I certainly learned a lot from this discussion, so thank you.
Thank you.